What am I saying again?
This is MPW,
MPW.
the podcast
with your host,
Xylo Aria. Cool.
a podcast about music production
for the everyday musician,
where we learn from experienced studio engineers and each other.
Andrew Huang is a Toronto-based musician, producer, and YouTuber. He has released over 2,000 songs in multiple different genres and is perhaps best known for his strange feats of musicianship. With over 2 million subscribers on YouTube and 300 million views, his channel features a wide range of content for musicians of all levels. Hello, Andrew. It is lovely to have you on this podcast. So how are you doing today? It's towards the end of your day. How's it been?
Yeah, this is my last little thing before I go for dinner with my family. And yeah, doing well. I've got a lot on the go right now, but it's all good stuff. But yeah, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. And yeah, it'll be interesting to learn a bit more about that because it does seem like you have so many different projects in so many different spaces. Actually, jumping into that a little bit, I'm curious to know, and some people might know your journey, and I have read a little bit about it myself, but where did things start for you in music and how did you get to where you are now? And if you can give us a little summary of that.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it brief. I've been doing music my whole life. My mom's quite musical, and actually her mom was also a music teacher. So there's definitely, a nice head start there as far as just people in my life who love music and were able to share a lot with me. But I did the kind of piano lesson thing as a kid and just really fell in love with everything about music the more I learned about it. It might be, any different genre, any instrument I came across. I just really liked all of it. And so anything my friends were listening to or that a teacher showed me or something, I was all, super, super interested. And eventually got into recording and tried writing my own stuff. And then I was actually looking for a summer job when I think it was 19 or 20. And I had the idea that I would post myself on eBay. And if people won this auction, then I would write and record a song for them. So kind of like a Fiverr type of thing before Fiverr was around. Like this was before even, Facebook was a thing. And I just had that idea and I gave it a shot and people actually bid on these auctions. That just became my job for a few years. And I wasn't even that great at what I was doing, but I was the only person offering this kind of thing, in the early 2000s. And so I had my very basic recording setup and I had been writing songs on my own, not really showing them or getting feedback from anybody, but feeling like they were okay. And, the stuff that I was writing for people was very forgiving, I guess. It wasn't like super intense or professional. Just people thought it would be cool to have a song about their cat or whatever it might be. So that's sort of like where I got going with actually doing anything professional. I kind of like lucked into this weird approach. And then it allowed me it made me get better at everything that I was doing because I was suddenly, at 20 years old, like I had clients and deadlines and like all this kind of stuff that really propels you. Yeah, a few years after that, started a YouTube channel about everything that I'm interested in music, everything I'm like learning about myself or anything that I think is worth sharing. And that has just grown and grown.
Okay. Well, I think you have summarized that very, very quickly, that journey, which makes it seem nice and easy and everything worked out perfectly fine. But
no struggles at all along the way.
No. But yeah, no, that's such a cool thing to hear and something you've sort of stumbled upon in a way, but really created everything from the ground up yourself. And can you tell me a little bit about when you started YouTube? And it was a while ago. And when, I guess, being a YouTuber, I don't know if that was really a thing back then or as prevalent as it is now. And what did people around you say when you were doing this? And I was watching one of your videos where you were talking about there was a year where you really put everything into it and kind of went really hard and got your strategy in place and everything. And what were people around you saying and what was your reaction to that?
Yeah, at the start, it was very strange to be doing YouTube at all. And I got in there very early. At the time, I actually felt like I was late to it because I was coming across other people who had been doing a channel for 2 or 3 years and maybe they would have like 20,000 subscribers or something. And it just seemed like an unfathomable number, you know, I felt like, oh, I've maybe missed the train, but I think it's worth a shot anyway. And as it turns out, I was there like very, very early. I think I started my account in 2006. And then maybe 3 or 4 years later, I was feeling like I really want to be uploading to YouTube regularly and make this one of my main creative outlets. That's what I did. And it went kind of haphazardly for a while. Like, I am not a very organized person a lot of like I have so many systems that I've tried to create to make myself more organized, but like at heart I'm just like pure chaos. And so approaching YouTube out of just interest and excitement, I didn't have any strategy for years, and it was just like, oh, I'll make something when I feel like it and put it up. And I did slowly grow. I think it was around 2014 I felt like YouTube really was the place for me, and it was where I wanted to concentrate as much of my focus and energy as possible. And I kind of figured out how I'd want to do that. And maybe a year or so later, that was the time that you mentioned that I really just cleared everything else away. And every single thing that I did was only about growing my YouTube channel. I've never before or since had that type of focus, and it really paid off. I think I grew by 1 million subscribers in 18 months. I look at it now as like laying a foundation for just being able to do what I want at my own pace now, because those 18 months were like super grueling, and I was just like constantly doing YouTube stuff, thinking about YouTube stuff, hanging out with YouTube related people, and working like 12 to 18 hours a day, including most weekends. It was just insane. And also I was like, I basically used up all the fastest video ideas I had in that time period, because I was like, how can I put out 2 videos a week, which seems like just on the cusp of being manageable. And then by the end of it, I was like, no, the videos I want to do now are taking longer and longer, so everything's getting more and more stressful. I think I'm going to chill out and be fine with like growing slower and putting out less. And I am fine with that. Yeah, it was an interesting time. And I think also, you know, I got very lucky. It happened to be a very good time for that kind of hustle. Like, it was right at this point, I feel like, where YouTube was becoming more mainstream, but it was still a bit weird to do it, as opposed to now where it's just so saturated. And then at the same time, that mix between like it kind of being acceptable, but not that many people were competing. But yeah, I guess, though, to speak to the earlier part of your question, like right at the start of my journey, it was super outside the box to be thinking about it. Like, people just thought you were so strange to stop touring, you know, like I used to record other artists in my home studio. I like stopped doing all that. I stopped like my DJ gigs, like everything else stopped, and I just started doing YouTube, and everyone was like, why? But, yeah, and I can't pretend like I, you know, saw the future or anything. It just felt right for me. But yeah.
No, I love that. It's important to kind of go with your gut if that's what felt right, and just go with it, which I think for a lot of people can be really scary. And that, what you mentioned on the 18 months and kind of eating dreamy and sleeping this one goal that you had, kind of reminds me of this saying that I really like. The main thing is making the main thing the main thing. Oh, yeah, I've butchered that. Anyway.
Yeah, that's fun. I like that.
but the idea, the point is to kind of really focus on one thing at a time, because we think this thing of multitasking and people can do it and there's techniques and things, but probably that's not really a thing. So just putting all your focus on one thing, it seems to have worked for you.
I heard another thing I really like that's sort of a similar or additional perspective on that, which is priority used to not be pluralizable. Like, you only have one priority ever. And I feel like that is just a great way to look at things, because we really cannot ever do 2 things at the same time. So you don't have like this priority, that priority. You have like the thing that you've chosen to do right then.
That's great. So I know you've been kind of putting yourself out there for a little while, and probably the audience knows you quite well, but I'm wondering if there is a random fact that you can tell us about you that maybe not that many of your audience know.
The thing that comes to mind is something that part of my audience definitely knows about, but is from a very long time ago, which is that I used to have a nipple piercing. This is like the thing. And I had this girlfriend in high school, and we were just bored one night, and we were like, what do you want to do? And she like kind of dared me to get this piercing. And so I did it. I was
God.
16. Just funny. I managed to hide it from my mom for like a year or two. Anyway, the reason why like the old school little segment of my audience would know about that is because I ended up writing a song about it when it grew out like 15 years later. And I wrote this kind of like really heartfelt, like goodbye, almost breakup song. And if you didn't know, you'd just think it was a normal song, but it's actually about saying goodbye to this nipple ring. Anyway,
Nipple piercing.
yeah, I feel like most of my audience would not know that though. That was an old one.
Okay, that's great. I was wondering, I mean, it didn't have to be anything to do with music, but you've managed to bring that back to music, which is great. Okay, well, is there then any event in your life that you feel like you would change?
I think nothing in particular, except that I know I would love to go back and tell my younger self to just like concentrate even more on the things that I really am the most passionate about and believe in the most. I think that, I don't know how it is for anybody else. I feel like I wasted a lot of time kind of doing things I half cared about because I felt like, oh, I should kind of broaden my chances, or I should, just to do a bit more exploring, I guess. And, I'm not trying to say that it's bad to try different things out, but I feel like I knew early on about certain aspects of music or ways that I wanted to approach music that felt like the best fit for me. And instead of giving those things 100% for a long time, I just kind of like tried to get a bunch of different things off the ground. So yeah, that's my big thing that I think about sometimes, about how much more could I have pushed the needle in the direction I really wanted to go with that attitude earlier on.
Yeah. Okay. It's funny that one does come up a bit with people in music, I think, of them feeling like they could have just kind of backed themselves earlier or something like that to really go for it. But I think hearing that from people like you, who in my mind did that way earlier than most people, is interesting as well, because personally I started my career in accounting, like nothing to do with music. So I feel like I wasted probably a lot more time. But we all get there eventually, don't we?
Yeah, I think we all do. The ones of us who are having these kinds of conversations.
Yes, that's true. Not everyone, I guess. All right. Well, getting to our topic today, where we're talking about creative ways to beat writer's block. And as someone who I think creates so much music in so many different genres and styles, I was keen to get your perspective on this. So firstly, how would you approach a project that's kind of half done and you don't really know where to take it? Are there any techniques that you would use to then finish that project?
I definitely try to get to a place where I have a vision of the final project. And I think that for me, when I'm stuck, a lot of the times it's because I haven't decided where this project I'm working on should end up. Like it's a little too formless, or, I haven't decided if it fits on a certain release or something. And I think, especially being someone who's interested in a lot of genres, I can start something and it could, has the possibility to go like EDM or pop or experimental or like all these places, ambient. So getting to that place where you make a commitment and you say like, oh no, you know what? I want this to be a really tight, polished, super snappy song. It's going to be vocal. It's going to be sparkly, whatever it might be. You make those calls. Maybe you have references that you pull in that, no one has to know about, but you have this kind of guidepost. And that, I think, is huge because that just limits your options and makes you, make certain kind of decisions in service of the song. I think that's like the big thing for me, is just finding that vision.
That's a good one to think about, actually, because I feel like a lot of people might not approach their songwriting that way and just kind of haphazardly doing that. And I guess there's no right or wrong, but that's a great thing to think about.
It's interesting because sometimes you'll have the vision before you even start working on the song, right? There's times where you just get inspired and you're like, oh, I know, I hear this thing and I want to bring it to life. And then at other times, we all just enjoy messing around, playing with stuff in the studio, try a new plugin or whatever it might be, where you're just exploring and you're coming up with little random sounds or ideas. And then, I think with those, even though they start from this much more free form place, eventually, if it becomes something you feel like has potential and you want to get it to the finish line, I think you have to find that vision somewhere, somehow.
Yeah, it's a good thing to think about. And also the reference tracks, I guess, is potentially a good idea if you're feeling stuck and a bit lost on where you can take it. So good to think about. And then coming to writer's block. Now, this is something that I personally feel like I experience often, and there are times where I'm just like, I don't want to touch music at all, or, a DAW. And I'm sure a lot of people have experienced this at some stage and maybe go in and out of that. Is this something that you have struggled with? And if so, what helps you get back into producing and creating again?
I think I struggle with it less and less as time goes on, because I think having done so many things, I just know that once I get going, something will happen. And like the hardest part really is starting a lot of the times, like worrying that you're going to make something bad, or like that you won't have any ideas, or all the things that I think us as artists, we have these thoughts. But yeah, I feel like just getting going, you usually do end up somewhere, if only like getting more practice in. The different ways that I kind of like trick myself into starting something, or like making it more fun or interesting to actually sit down and put in the time, is just finding something novel for me really works. Like I just really enjoy discovering something new. And so if it's anything from like trying out a new plugin to just like looking up a new kind of chord that maybe I haven't used before, or like all kinds of like forums are online where I actually still almost daily kind of like go through a few of these different forums where people are just talking about what they're doing in their production journey. And I almost always will find some idea or some perspective that I haven't tried myself before. So
Are there any
I think
forums you would recommend?
I used to be on the Ableton one a lot. Various ones for like specific types of genres of music. Like there's an IDM forum, and I guess like with really kind of more technical and glitchy and electronic type of music like that, there's a lot more sort of detailed reading that maybe you might be compelled to do in that genre. So there's ones like that, and there's ones that are centered around certain gear brands. Let's say like the Electronauts forum has a lot of like pretty advanced creators on there. And it's not only focused around people who use Electron gear, for instance, but there's just a lot of discussion that goes on in those kinds of places, or even like a random Reddit thread. Like sometimes I will just Google, sound design Reddit, and then some random thread will come up in the search results, and I'll just be reading about, some interesting thing that somebody's trying out that I haven't done before. So things like that, as long as you eventually do get off the internet and start
Yes.
trying things on your own, I feel like, those are sort of like my little inspiration sparks.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so many good ideas there, and definitely good to see what else people are doing and something that you might get excited to try out. And that reminds me, not too long ago, I think I just saw like a little 30-second Instagram reel or something like that, where someone had just created a whole song using one single sample. And I was like, whoa, that's so cool. And yeah, actually that hugely inspired me. And I feel like that was one of the quickest songs that I had written to just try and replicate what this person did.
Nice. Yeah, those like creative challenges and exercises are usually great for that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we will keep an eye out on those and get on the forums, and make sure we get off the forums as well to get onto the creation. So yeah, great.
Yeah, I think too, like just a small thing to add on that is with production especially, there's just so many weird tricks and fun things to try. And I feel like, when I came from more of a traditional songwriting background, because I started just listening to like rock and pop and was just trying to write stuff on piano and guitar, and that has fewer tricks. I feel like you just kind of you sit there with your instrument and you've got to like come up with stuff, and you could still do things like learn a new scale, learn a new chord, but I don't know, with production it can come a little easier just because there's so many more angles to explore with different soft synths or effects, or there's just a lot more, I think, concrete techniques that you can kind of get into.
Yeah, it's good to mention and good to hear as well, because I guess for people maybe that are in their earlier stages of production, maybe looking at the software is a bit more intimidating than looking, picking up a guitar or something like that. So it's good to hear that once you get a bit more familiar with it and lose that fear and you're less scared to just try random things, there are some techniques that you can use.
That's a good point too, actually, about just like getting away from that fear, like giving yourself permission to just make something really, really terrible and, not have that, reflect badly on who you are as an artist or like how talented you are, or anything like you just, everybody has off moments or off seasons even, and I think managing to still kind of get in your chair and do the work is still the most valuable thing.
Yeah, for sure. And on this, something that a friend of mine who's also a YouTuber and I decided to do to get out of our heads a little bit was to, maybe less relevant to you because you've already worked across so many different genres, but we were like, we're going to create something in a genre that's completely opposite to what we do and there's no pressure. It doesn't matter if it sounds terrible. And it was one of the funnest things I've done, actually. And made something in like minimal tech, which is not something that I make at all. It's good.
That's great, though. I still find so many of these little genre combinations or niches to explore. And I feel like it's endless. So, yeah.
Cool. Okay, so still a useful one for you. That's good to know. Nice. So then getting into the creation process, I think especially when you are new to production, you might think that you need to add more and more element to make a sound good. So how do you know when there are enough elements in there and when to stop adding?
This is something that is still tricky for me, I think. And I definitely am the kind of person that has that temptation to always keep adding stuff. And it's such a fine balance, because if you don't add enough, it really feels like a demo or it just doesn't feel full. And then, of course, at a certain point, it just gets messy and muddy and the listener doesn't know what to concentrate on. And I feel like it is the kind of a skill of knowing when to cut something or even for a section, building something that has the right flow to it and the right balance of elements. That's something that I think you do practice just like an instrument. You get a feel for things that work better. The thing that I feel like I always come back to is I actually read this in a book called The Mix Engineer's Handbook. And it was a little bit, more focused on mixing, but there was this principle about kind of separating all the parts of your song into the categories of foundation, rhythm, pads, lead, and fills. These 5 sort of pillars. And it was interesting that it wasn't like bass, mid, and treble or anything like that. It was more nebulous categories where, for instance, if you have a really rhythmic guitar part, that might count more as rhythm than as like a chord instrument, let's say, just for how you might best categorize it in this group of 5 things. And it was basically like for most sections of a song, if you have something doing each of these 5 jobs, then you're probably good. And also, if you're feeling like something is too sparse, then categorize what you have and see if there's one of these elements or maybe 2 of these elements that are missing. Like maybe you don't have a pad. You don't have like something nice and sustained that's in the background that's kind of giving glue to everything, for example. And then, at the same time, once you've added too much stuff, if you're feeling like, oh, I need to remove something, but I don't know exactly what, you can kind of think about these 5 elements again and see like, oh, you know what? I actually have 3 things that feel like they're competing as the lead instrument. And clearly that does it. So it's kind of like a system of guidelines for helping you determine which things might be more necessary to add or take away.
That's cool, actually. What were those categories again?
Foundation, which is kind of like bass, but interestingly, they would also, if I recall, lump in like something like a kick drum there, where like maybe you would consider that like a rhythm thing because it's from the drums, but like you sort of have this foundational aspect of your song, and maybe you'd include the bass in that. Maybe you'd include the chord changes in that. And, some instruments might kind of fit into two categories. But yeah, so there's a foundation, and then there's rhythm, which would be like, actually, I think the way that it was explained in this book was like it's counter to the foundation. So a snare drum and a hi-hat, that would sort of not often play at the same time as the kick drum. And so you have those two elements that, there's a bit of a push and pull. The pads are any kind of long sustained sound. The lead is, of course, like a vocal or some kind of melodic element, or even, in more modern music, you'll have like a sound effect or whatever cool thing that is the focal point for most listeners. And then the fills is the final category, which is just like in between the leads, some kind of call and response thing, or just like additional ear candy or a drum fill or anything like that to keep things interesting, because you don't want to have a melody that's just constant, but you also, in the spaces, want a little something extra to kind of fill everything out. So those 5 categories I still think about a lot of the times, and it's been probably 10 years since I wrote or read that book. But yeah, very helpful.
Yeah, it's a great thing to think about. I haven't really thought about things in that way. If you have lots of elements and they all, most of them sit in one or two of those categories, you might actually have too much going on there, and to separate them out or add something else in a different category and take something out of there. So I love that. I've heard that book mentioned a couple of times, actually, so I might need to get onto it myself.
Yeah, it's by Bobby Oswinski or something like that. I'm really not going to get the last name right, but yeah, it's by Bobby.
Okay, all right. Bobby and the
Mixing Engineer's
Handbook. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, we will keep that in mind. So what techniques would you suggest to create more contrast between different sections within a track?
Yeah, I mean, definitely what we just touched on as far as removing things or adding things, like just taking one of the main instruments completely away for a section is so simple and often so effective. I definitely think in terms of a few different elements of how you would perceive a song. Like, so for instance, the frequency spectrum, like low to high, can you have contrast between sections where some will be a lot less treble, or some, you just take out the bass elements as a contrast, or the kind of other side of that is, I think of bass to treble as kind of like bottom to top. And then if you're thinking left to right, you have your spatial kind of placement of things, whether that's effects like with reverb and making things feel further away, or I guess maybe that's more of a front to back thing. But, thinking of all these dimensions where you have depth and wideness, and yeah, maybe you'll go from a section where everything is quite mono to something where you've got things really panned. There's contrast there. And then again, with the kind of like front to back angle, I guess, to something where everything's really close or really far, very dry or very washed out. So I think about those kinds of things. And one that I heard recently that I thought was interesting and haven't really employed yet. Actually, I did have something where I kind of like used a vinyl effect just for one section of a song. But the thing was like thinking of different sections as different ages. Like your verses might be, I don't know, from the 1960s, and then the choruses are super modern. So not even with, going as far as specific techniques, like I'll record all the verses on tape and whatever, but more just like if there's a feeling from that era, or like a sort of fidelity or tone that you might be more inspired to lean towards in one section, and then in another section it's more about like brightness or impact or forwardness, these kinds of things, having a contrast that, I don't know, it was an interesting idea that I just recently read about thinking about different ages. I guess that's maybe like tonal contrast or vibe contrast. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So a few different techniques there, adding and taking things away. And we had like contrast of spatial things to consider, and potentially eras. So few things that we can try there. That's great. That's great. And would you say you have an overall biggest tip for finishing songs?
Yeah, it really is just like deciding to finish it and putting in a bunch of time, and it is like a part this is going to feel maybe less fun and more like work. I've kind of like come to terms with that part of it because I used to just feel like, oh, I'm like making music, it's going to be a great time. And then I'd only have half finished songs. And I discovered like, oh, if I really want to make this like super good, I really want to be proud of it, I want to share it with the world, and I want to make it something that will be really enjoyable for other people, I kind of have to do a lot more of these kind of like detail oriented things, of polishing, of kind of like checking things out on different systems, and like all these things are a little bit more work than fun, but totally worth it to kind of get your ideas out. But yeah, the big thing is just the decision to do that, because otherwise you can just keep opening a project and kind of like, messing around with it. But the commitment to getting to the finish line will focus you, I think, a bit more on the most concrete things that you should work towards with the track.
Okay. It sounds like a very simple thing, just deciding to finish a song, but there's so much in that, I think.
Yeah, it's fully like, that little attitude tweak before you start a session completely changes the result you have at the end of it.
Is it something that you think you get better with the more you do that?
Yeah, I think that's another one of those things that, you don't necessarily think of as a skill, but finishing a piece of music is totally a skill. It's something that, you learn ways that both like techniques that help make something better and more finished, but also the things that will get you into that space where you're able to make those decisions and put in that work. And I guess I can throw in a little tip too here, which is that when I know I'm getting to that finishing stage, I start taking notes and I try and like listen to what I have without looking at the DAW and without stopping it or anything, and just like make notes about what I'm actually hearing and like how it's hitting me, and then what ideas do I have about just kind of attending to those final details, which are usually like mix things, transitions. You kind of use your ears and notice what you think still needs to be improved. And I feel like maybe I go through anywhere from like 2 to 5 rounds of that, and each time you're making fewer and fewer notes, but also more and more detailed notes, because as you fix the big things, you notice small things. And then that sort of is what I've been doing for a long time, and that's really helpful. And basically you get to a point where you listen all the way through and you're like, I don't think I have any notes for myself. And then you're done.
Yay!
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, the dream part when you actually can say that you're done, which is great. Cool. No, thank you. That was lovely, and a few great useful tips there. All right. Well, now we're going to jump into our little Would You Rather speed quiz. Andrew, are you ready?
I gotta be, yeah.
Okay. All right. So, would you rather be out of tune or a half beat behind?
Oh, no. I guess a half beat behind, because that will at least be like more listenable and interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I like it. Would you rather listen to your least favorite genre for a day nonstop, or never listen to your favorite genre for a year?
Oh, I could easily handle my least favorite genre for a day nonstop. Yeah. There's no music I hate that much, I don't think.
That's good. Nice and easy. Would you rather be able to hear a sound or be able to see colors?
Oh, definitely hear. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we have to say that here.
I had to think about that for a second. I was like, wait, what is... No, yeah, okay. I think I expected it to be a trick or something. Anyway, sorry.
No. Okay, not music related, but would you rather give up air conditioning and heating for the rest of your life, or give up the internet for the rest of your life?
Oh, no. Wow, I think I'm going to say air conditioning and heating.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I love the internet. Yeah, use that thing a lot. I can, I can wear sweaters. It's fine.
Okay, all right. Load up on the sweaters and bring on the internet. Okay, good. Would you rather be a talented songwriter who can't sing, or a great singer who can't write songs?
I think I'd rather write songs. I just love that part of the process so much more.
Love it. Okay, well, that was very good, Andrew. That was speedy enough, I would say.
Sweet. Yeah. Tried to just give it to you right from my brain.
That's it. That's it. First thought. That's the best. All right. Well, bringing us to our top tips section, can you tell me what is your one top career tip for music?
Kind of going back to that thing about like what I would say to my younger self, really just figuring out what is right for you and pursuing that, I think is the biggest thing. You know, we all have our unique skills and ways that we can put them together. You know, rather than trying to do something that you think you should or that everyone else is doing, I think when you can find like that thing that just excites you the most and build on that and improve yourself in that area. I don't know. I think for me, that's just what I learned over and over, kind of the long way around by trying so many different things and realizing like, oh, no, I should do this thing that doesn't necessarily have a template yet or that I don't see a lot of other people doing, but it just makes sense to me. And worked out for me. I don't know what I can promise to anybody else, but I feel like that, yeah, it just it's so key to do what you truly feel the most passionate about.
Yeah, I love that. And sometimes I guess with that kind of thing, you can't see the clear path, but to just go with it and back yourself, I think is a great
Yeah,
great tip.
and it is tricky. Like, you know, you always get a lot of different messages from all kinds of places. And yeah, I think finding some way to clear a bit of that noise and truly do you, I think that's the move.
Top tip, you do you. Love it. Okay, cool. So what is your one top self-care tip?
I mean, for me, it's just actually taking time off. It's very easy for like I had a good few years after I stopped my that 18-month grind and I was just more balanced about how I approach YouTube. Now I have a kid, so there's like much more limited time again. And so I do find myself like, oh, she's in bed. I better like dive back into, you know, put in some more work on these projects. But yeah, being able to, you know, get a bit more scheduled and make time to just not that I, you know, suddenly have no responsibilities, I guess, but being okay with having a couple of hours where I really don't actually do something on my phone, on the computer, in the studio. And, you know, that lets me have a bath or read a book or like whatever it might be. Like even just like realizing that I haven't applied moisturizer in a few days. Yeah, there's like so many things that for me are like a challenge when they should probably be basic. But yeah, I think just making that time. I don't know if this applies to only other workaholics or what, but I hope that helps somebody.
Yeah, I think a few people will get something from that. And at the risk of kind of derailing where we're getting to, but one thing that you mentioned about, you know, having a child and how that's kind of changed your schedule. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you manage that? Because right now I feel like I'm seeing this in peers my age. And if you're working full time, you're going to get paternity leave and all of that stuff, and you don't really have to think about your income. But as a freelancer where you're doing everything yourself, how does that work for you when you have a child, and how do you manage your schedule?
Yeah, I've definitely become much more scheduled since Evelyn came along. And I think the big thing is just having to sacrifice a few things that you used to spend time on. So, like, now I actually am just not on social media. Like, I come up with posts and then I have an assistant who puts them up for me. And then I will go to my own posts and reply to people when I have a spare moment. But I actually don't scroll my feed anymore. I've just like, that doesn't happen now, and it's been great. And then also things like video games or watching shows, or I mean, I think I've seen like one movie in the past year. There's just like a bunch of these things that are really nice and enjoyable, and I just give up a certain amount of them. I think that's the main thing. And then, you know, the schedule is so good for the kid to understand her day and her world and kind of get into a flow of things and not have too many unexpected things come up that throw her off. So yeah, it works out that it's also good for me to just like know which hours I have to work, and then I do what I can in those times. yeah, I think the main thing is just like, I don't have too much fun other than what fun I can get from work time and family time. And it's, I have a
Okay.
great job and I have a really fun kid. So there's still plenty of fun, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. No, it's interesting to hear about, and thanks for sharing that. And taking us to our last question, what is your one top general life tip?
I think what I will say is just openness. I feel like, I don't know how long this will get, but I'm going to go back a little bit to when I was a kid where I looked different from anybody I went to school with. And I was just kind of weird in general, like as a person. So there was not a lot of fitting in for me. And I used to get down about that. But I think when I look back, I see that actually gave me so much freedom because I was kind of like, well, I already don't fit in. So I can just do whatever I want because I'm already going to like only have a couple friends. I'm already going to get laughed at or whatever. And so I really think that contributed a lot to my outlook, which is that instead of kind of doing things just because that's how everyone else was doing them, I would really try and look at things for what they were, as much as I could, try to be objective about that and realize like, oh yeah, all these traditions are kind of like social constructs. These are just things that somebody decided on, and they might not be bad things, but maybe they're not for me. And I think that it freed me up a lot. And so I took that to a lot of different areas of my life where I could just be open about anything really. I mean, it's probably a big part of why I've explored so many different types of music. And then I have very strange, unique career path, and being open about everything from like sleep schedule to diet to like outlook on all kinds of things in life. That's only been a good thing for me. And I feel like, for anybody in any area where you can expand your perspective a bit, I can only think that would be a benefit.
That's really great, actually, because I think there are a few ways that you could have responded to being the odd person out and not really fitting in. And you could have been really down about that for a long time and not really seen the upside. But it's really lovely that you've kind of used that as an advantage for you in a way to challenge the status quo. And it's great to think about certain things. I think sometimes when you're growing up, you just accept everything for what it is without realizing there's probably some human at some stage that decided that, and now it's just what we do, and which might not be the right thing for everyone. So I love that. Thank you for sharing. All right, that brings us to the end of the episode. Really, really appreciate your time, Andrew, and I know I've learnt quite a few new things there, and I'm sure our audience has too. So thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, I've had a great time chatting with you. Thanks so much for having me. And everyone listening, thanks for being there. Thanks for doing you. And I hope you got something out of this.
Cool. Thank you.
My biggest 3 takeaways from Andrew's episode on how to finish more music was firstly to have a vision for the songs that you are trying to complete. So you can use some reference tracks to help you understand where you're trying to get to and work towards that. My second biggest takeaway was to decide to finish more music. And rather than starting lots of new songs, make the decision to finish your songs when you start them, and this will create a habit for you to keep doing that. And my last takeaway was for you to do what feels right for you in music, but also in your life and in your career, rather than what other people feel like you should do or could do. That's it from us this week, and we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.